Hi there. It's November the 7th. We continue our progress through the letter to the Hebrews and the Greek scriptures, and we're in chapter 8, and we're reading the whole chapter from verses 1 to 13. In the first part of this chapter, the writer continues his unfolding of the teaching about Jesus as the high priest. And he says that the high priest has come and he has actually sat down at the right hand of God. He's taken his gifts right into the presence of God himself. He is the minister, the writer says, of the true tent or the true tabernacle. This word tabernacle obviously is linked to the tabernacle in the wilderness, a tabernacle in the desert, where God came and lived right in the middle of his people as they camped around. The word tabernacle is an old word. It's actually from a Latin word, tabernaculum, that means a little shed. And actually the tabernacle in the wilderness was really a shed with a tent over it. Tent is one way of translating it, but tabernacles, when tabernacles are built in Israel, even now in the Feast of Tabernacles, they're more like sheds with coverings over them. But whatever it is, God has a true tabernacle. He has the true dwelling place of God, which is in his presence in the heavenly realms. And that's where Jesus has now gone to offer his sacrifice of his own blood. And that means he's not part of the human priesthood here on earth. So the writer contrasts between Jesus' priesthood, which he's been saying is of the order of Melchizedek, with the human, the Levitical priesthood, that does continually go in and offer gifts. He actually says something interesting. He says if Jesus were here on earth now, he wouldn't even be a priest because he's not of the line of Levi. He's of the line of Judah. But Jesus has superseded this. He's gone into something which is not just a type and a shadow, but the reality. The writer says that what's happened here on earth, the tabernacle that had God ordered here on earth, is actually a copy, a mirror image of the way in which God is worshipped in heaven. And that's why God said to Moses, you have to produce this tabernacle, you have to make this tabernacle exactly according to the pattern that I've shown you on Mount Sinai, because there is where a pattern of heaven is shown. But now Jesus has gone into that tabernacle in the heavenly places, and he is there permanently, and therefore it says he has received a vastly superior priesthood, a vastly superior service than those who were part of the old priesthood or the Levitical priesthood, and it's also based on better promises. And then in the second part of the chapter, the writer quotes at length from Jeremiah 31 from the New Covenant. He says, after all, Jesus has established a new covenant or a renewed covenant. If the first one had been without fault, it wouldn't have needed this new renewal of covenant that God has put in place. Now, when we think about renewal, it's quite important to know that God is not dismissing or he's not cancelling, negating the old covenant. It's much more like if you have a new version of a computer software operating program, if you get a new upgrade of an old program, that it actually broadens and deepens your experience. It adds new things in. But your old files will still operate on the new system. So what this covenant is, it's an upgrade. It supersedes the old one. There are bits of the new one that will not operate on the old one. But actually this new covenant, this renewed covenant that God makes, is laid down there in Jeremiah 31, from which, as I say, the Hebrews writer quotes at length. And he says, this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Now that's an interesting thing. This covenant is not just with anybody who believes in Messiah, but this covenant is with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And the promise is that it's not going to be written on tablets of stone. It's not going to be an external covenant, but it's going to be written on the heart, on the inner being of those who believe, of Israel and Judah, and it's going to go deep, and it is going to be backed up by the fact that God himself, the lawgiver himself, the one who has been behind all of this process, is going to live within his people, and he's going to keep the law in them. And so they won't need any more to say to one another, come on, know the Lord, and teach them and cajole them. They won't say know the Lord, because everyone will know him. And of course that word is very important in the biblical understanding. The word know, experience, have relationship with. Everyone will have relationship with the Lord, from the greatest to the least to greatest. Everyone will come to know God, and also he will forgive their sins and he will remember their failures no more. And therefore, this is the covenant of which Jesus is the mediator, and it's a new covenant. It's one that renders the old one obsolete. I mean, if you've got a new upgrading system, you stop selling the old one in the computers world. You don't keep going with that one. You're going to transfer everyone to the new one. And now we are all transferred into this new covenant. This is the covenant that Jesus initiated at the Passover with his disciples the night before he died, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood." It's perhaps one of the only times Jesus actually uses those terms, new covenant. And here it is referring to his death, and it's referring also to this Jeremiah 31 passage, which the writer to the Hebrews is quoting. We can be so glad this morning. We are so overjoyed today that God has written us into the new covenant, that because of this upgraded, new, renewed covenant, deepened, broadened the scope of it. Yes, it includes Israel and Judah. It includes God's ancient people with whom he made that covenant to Abraham, that through him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. It includes them, but it grafts us in. We are now included. We are part of this move of God to save the world by our faith in Messiah Jesus, by our faith in Israel's Messiah. What an amazing heritage we have in this covenant that God has made. Have a very good November the 7th.